I will make student life safer where no one else does. I will make it more accountable where no one else does. And I will make it cheaper and more livable in a way that no one else does as well. Hi, I'm Archie Wolifson. My pronouns are he, him. I'm in my third year. I'm doing a Bachelor of Commerce and Advanced Studies, hoping to get rid of advanced studies and make it commerce and arts, but I guess we'll have to see about that. And I study political economy and finance. My campaign slogan is "All in with Archie." My campaign manager is the lovely Lila Thurbin. My campaign color is black, which I believe is easy to remember because it's 000. I'm an independent candidate. I'm not. Progressive. Can I?
Yeah. What is that?
So I was raised by a single mum who works as a fundraising manager for a charity that provides legal rights to refugees. It's about as progressive as that would make it, you know. Yeah. Yes. In theory, I think incorporation is good and necessary. Liability is something that we should strive for. I think it would make the USU better. However, in practice, as was evidenced by the actual vote on incorporation, it was, firstly, immensely rushed. They did not consult with students, and I think the statistics bear that out in that they said they would have around 80% of students supporting it, and that was not the case. Then, in terms of the actual meeting itself, there was about, I think, 10 minutes to ask questions about why it was bad, and then they got the maths wrong at the end. And me and my good friend Will had to be the people to like tap them on the shoulder and be like, no, it didn't pass. All of which I think is quite suspect in terms of incorporation, and why I think that people were aggrieved about the process of changing the governance. And in short, the reason why I am not enthused with the past proposed change, but am in favor of incorporation at large, is we were told during the whole process that there was no other solution, there was no other alternative, and there was nothing else possible. We just had to accept the conditions if we wanted to get incorporation. We now know that's not true. We've been provided with a new constitution that doesn't have the amended changes and that is different. So yes, I think that informs why the existing incorporation, as it was initially proposed, was not viable, was not useful, was not good for students, but why in theory I would definitely support incorporation. As a last thing I'll add to that new constitution has, I believe, a clause in it which says that the USU should and must crack down on things like discrimination. Obviously, while in theory this is quite good, this has in a lot of ways been a bit of a dog whistle for cracking down on student protests, labeling them as discriminatory or disruptive, and then trying to get rid of them. I think in engaging with incorporation and ensuring that it goes through, we should ensure that that is made as specific as possible so that we don't have to deal with all of those problems and open up the USU to the same problems that the cap is currently putting on most students.
When you say making it as specific as possible, do you mean amending the phrasing in such a way that you wouldn't be able to restrict free speech?
Yes. The reason I don't think it's a problem is that the USU doesn't do this right now. The USU, at least for the vast majority of students, is not a very strong force in terms of cracking down on people. So essentially the uni hasn't got the thing that they want, and if they did want the USU to do this, I think they would have been using it in much more full force than they are right now. So I don't think that it would be a very large impediment to negotiation. The very last thing I'll point out is incorporation is actually in the university's interest in a lot of ways. Like students having less liability, students having better quality of life, if you believe that from the people that say it, is in the interests of the university's customers. Like they want people to not have to face the threat of being sued or legal liability. It is a good thing for them if incorporation succeeds in a lot of ways. And so I think we should approach the negotiations in that way and remind them of that fact and leverage that to try and ensure that it goes through in a way that actively does support students.
Okay, that might be true to an extent, but it's also obviously in the university's interest to not be incorporated. They've attempted in the past to do things like dissolve the USU entirely, given that especially the rhetoric that we're hearing from current board directors about being beholden to the university when it How do you foresee that simply presenting your cards on the table and claiming that this is the interest of the university will actually cause them to be more open to your suggestions?
Yeah, I want to be clear. Like this is a complicated process. It will be an opaque process, but the university, I think, has come to the table, and I think there is no reason, for example, that the university must have a new restructuring of the board in order to get incorporation through. I think if we are, if the university was willing to come to the table for that, I think it would very much be willing to come to the table in absence of that change. And I also think that the university would, in a lot of ways, be willing to come to the table for incorporation, given that they already have. It will be hard, and it will be a difficult process to negotiate, but it's one that we know that we have empirical success in doing, at least to this point. And I don't see why a few minor changes would be as enormous of an impediment as people might make it out to be. So I've been involved in the debating society a little bit. I've gone to a few other countries for that, which is quite fun. I've been involved in a variety of other societies, a consulting society that consults startups, and some other ones as a sort of a wee first year. In terms of the way in which I think clubs and societies can be better, there are a few things that I think the USU can and should do in order to help them. The first of which is deal with a whole lot of just the bureaucratic processes that make running a club very hard. The first of which is handover procedures, which do not sound like they're as big of a problem as they actually are, but things like organizing the bank account details between the current treasurer and the new treasurer requires those two people to go to a sort of a bank branch, requires a whole lot of financial expertise that if you're running like the Chocolate Society or the Taylor Swift Society, you don't have. And I think the USU does have that, and we can proliferate that down towards societies. We can give them a guide of how to maintain them, and we can provide that to new societies so that they know what to do, so they've got guidance in creating their constitutions, and that those are created with the future in mind rather than just right now.
To jump in there, when you mention financial handovers, this is in fact a legal process in that bank signatories do need to be changed, and these requirements are actually stipulated by the banks themselves, and less so the USU. So what do you actually propose in terms of actually streamlining this process?
Yeah, so in terms of streamlining it, the first thing I would note, obviously we can't change the way in which the legal procedures work. The problem, I think, is just that for the vast majority of clubs and societies, the person who is the president or the treasurer is likely someone in their final year who is about to leave because it's taken them that long to get into the position that is like higher up in the society. And so they then go AWOL from the society in a lot of cases. They're not present on campus. It's hard to find them or reach them. And when you're doing that handover process, you have all of the existing financial issues layered on top of the fact that the person that you're trying to do this with is not really that easy to get to on campus. Maybe they've got a full-time job. And in a lot of ways, for most societies, they don't have the knowledge of what those financial restrictions actually are, where they need to be, why they need signatories in the first place. And it's a relatively easy change, but it's one I think that would make, if implemented, if done early, would give USU clubs a lot more flexibility with getting ahead of their financial sort of reliances and compliances, and enable them to ensure that they're ready for the next year and they're getting started early rather than leaving these things too late.
But at the end of the day, it is the people who are signatories that need to sign the minutes that say that that authorize this change of signature. They do have to provide a wet signature. What would you actually do to compel them to do such a thing?
I actually think this is something the USU can do relatively easily, in that we can proliferate information at a set period of time in clubs and societies. Often they have a very sort of set life cycle where people are elected earlier in the year, and then move on, and then they graduate towards the end of the year, that the USU has the ability to get people in, say, the September or October period to start all of those handovers early, to place their, for example, financial elections then, such that you're not trying to catch up or find or chase after someone that is not a part of your club anymore, is not involved on campus, and that you can't find. And obviously this is a part of maybe more widespread reforms to clubs and societies to do with things like equity training and sexual assault that I detail a bit later. But I think this is a small change that is pretty easy to make and would make a relatively big difference in the bureaucratic overhead these people have to deal with.
Okay, interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, that was part one of your 3 things that would improve clubs and societies.
Yes.
Would you mind going through the other 2?
Yes. The second, and I think the one I'll headline, is to do with equity training around sexual assault in clubs and societies. The reason this is such a big issue is that in a lot of ways, the people who are victims are far too often people who are powerless. They're first years, they don't know who to go to in these clubs and societies, they're new on campus. And this is why the USU is, I think, instrumental in that for most people, they don't know or engage with the SRC very much. But everyone who is new engages in Welcome Fest, and every club and society has a relatively big reach in terms of getting towards students and affecting them. The thing that I would implement, I think has been implemented in some societies, but is not the norm, is that these societies have a specific equity officer who's been given training around how to deal with things like sexual assault. And most of these clubs, I hate to say it, have like 12 vice presidents or like 3 sponsorship directors. They're overwhelming with the number of people who want to be on executives and people who have executive power. And we've seen the precedent of societies doing this and doing this well. I think we should make this mandatory such that if someone is a vulnerable first year, they are not beholden towards trying to figure out where to go to. They have a specific person they've been taught to go to in that society. And that person is not just a random uni student with no training. They're someone who has been given some amount of training towards dealing with this well and knows who to direct them to if they don't. And that's easy. I think it definitely would change people's lives in a really positive way.
Do you think that it's not an undue burden that is put onto one person? And usually people going to all these positions are women, people of colour, people with disabilities. Is that not an undue burden, and that's something that should be shared by the rest of the executive?
It's a great question. The reason, I think that the first initial problem is that absent of this person, that burden is felt entirely by whoever the victim is, who I think statistically is more likely to be someone who is a gender minority. But more than that, I think these people, at least in our world, there is more likely, or the world in which this is passed, there's more likely to be someone who has training and someone who has someone they can direct this person to. If it is just an exec, I don't think the reality is that this is shared equally amongst the executives. Either the person who is attacked or abused doesn't tell anyone, in which case they're left alone, which is, I think, the worst case scenario, or they maybe tell one person that they know, in which case that person definitely shoulders a lot of the burden, but they don't know where to send the person who has suffered through whatever abuse or attacks they've had to deal with, and they don't have any training or strategies to deal with it well. So you're essentially forcing the burden onto someone that I think doesn't have any ability to make sure that this is a scenario that goes well, or at least goes better than it would have otherwise.
In your actual policy documents, you actually said that you want mandatory training for executives in this regard. So by that, I assume you mean all executives?
So specifically, it would entail having the core leadership team. So that is, most societies have the same structure, which is president, 2 vice presidents, or 1 vice president. These people having training, and then a set equity officer or an equity team, which many societies do have. Obviously, that means that one person's not dealing with it, trying to all go through a bit of training. And I think it is fair to suggest that, like trainings, it's a process, people have to do it, and in a lot of ways it is time out of their day, but I think it is time well worth spent if you consider the absolute, the suffering that people have to deal with as, people who are new to university, who don't have anywhere else to go, and who feel really a huge amount of shame going to their parents or going to anyone else about these things. I think it's worth bearing. It's a great question. I think it clearly outlines the problem right now, which is when these things are voluntary, so many clubs don't engage in them, they never do them, they don't think that they'll ever sort of see consequences or that it will ever see the light of day. Obviously, making it mandatory means that there are a series of consequences we can attach to clubs that don't do this. I think in a lot of, in sort of some instances where it is sort of very bad, where everyone on the exec sort of knows about this and not a single person reaches out, I'm very happy to attach pretty severe financial penalties that motivate people on these execs to show up, to engage in those meetings, and very happy to take those financial penalties and put them into paying for the training for everyone else. I think there is a very real narrative that we can tell people who run clubs and societies that this is something you should do because it will make your club better. Like, it will enormously improve the quality of life people in your society, even if you are sort of thinking about doing it or you don't know whether it will be good. People in your society staying because they don't have a bad experience, people in your society having a friend to talk to that they wouldn't have otherwise, is an enormous benefit to all of those people. That benefits them. It also benefits clubs and societies as well, and the campus as a whole. Yeah. It's a great question. I have sort of a number of things here. The first is that training as a whole, I think, provides far more empathy that motivates people to report in the first place. A big part of these training programs is you hear stories from victim survivors that are incredibly motivating, and well, motivating is a terrible word, but incredibly, like motivating towards people reporting. You see the damage that is done. I think in that context is more likely that people do report. But secondly, as a part of the USU providing training, I think it's very fair to say that we would have a person who looks into these issues, looks into whether or not clubs and societies are actively doing this well or not, and does reviews of how successful this has been. Obviously, there are always going to be elements of shame towards people coming forward, and I don't think there's anything that can entirely alleviate that. But if there are more consequences for clubs and societies not doing it, and if more and more people in that society know what is wrong and what is right, and have a very clear boundary that that is not okay and we shouldn't tolerate it, I think it is much more likely to be reported. Someone is much more likely to say something, and we're much more likely to get a little bit of change in a very tiring and sad battle that we should definitely be fighting.
Oh, interesting. So just to be clear, are you specifically suggesting a separate job role or position for looking into sexual assault, or for, I guess, being the authority on sexual assault in clubs and societies?
Yes, at least as a part of my policies, I think it would be a part of the organization that mandates these clubs to do investigations into, to provide this training. A part of that would be checking in on the clubs and actively having measures of accountability to not only ensure the training's being done, but ensure that clubs are complying with it, and it's not just like a thing that they will do and then sort of wash out.
Are you aware that in the student experience department that someone already has this job, they're the secretary communications coordinator?
Yes, so this, as a part of my policies, I think will work with measures that are already existing. The thing I think you do need to bridge the gap is the tangibly reaching out to clubs and societies preemptively with training. I think the problem, at least that I see it with existing measures, is that in a lot of ways they only act after something bad has been done, and will find ways to try and investigate societies, but don't work preemptively to try and get those societies to work against the things that are going on. Yeah, so it would just be essentially expanding the scope of that that role towards ensuring that these things are, ensuring that both the training is done well, but also and appropriately, and that people are taking it on board, and then also to reaching out to especially bigger clubs and societies with a lot more people to check in on this being done well, to speak to those equity officers, to have in-depth interviews with them, and investigate any things that have otherwise been sort of covered up. Yeah. Obviously, I want to be clear. There are many measures that have been taken that can't adequately deal with this problem because it is such a large one. I do think, though, this would make a pretty meaningful difference in doing so. If it's all right, I might describe how they should be. I think there has been a neglect of...
Could we describe what they are currently, and then you...
Yes, yeah. So obviously they have a degree of power over how the USU, or which policies the USU implements, how they implement policies, and whatnot. They have a lot of jurisdiction over over their own portfolio, but also over which things they want to investigate. In terms of the way in which they, I think, should be exercising those powers, I want to note firstly that I think in a lot of ways the USU has been neglected by the left to the left's detriment, and incorporation is for me a big sign of that. the left, in a lot of ways, has regarded the USU as sort of an organization that we shouldn't actively take part in. But that, I think, belies the fact that the USU has a huge amount of real power and a huge amount of real power over students' lives and their experiences. The vast majority of students, I think, spend far more time with whatever club and society they are in than they do with otherwise very large and very powerful political institutions. And the USU, if sort of left unchecked, I think has the ability to be neglected and is not used as effectively as possible. The second thing I would note is that the USU, I think, has been put forward as a particularly bureaucratic institution where many things could be done, but a lot of things won't be done. So, and I think bureaucracy is, again and again, the defense against board directors implementing a lot of policies in a sort of widespread fashion. I disagree with this. I think board directors have a huge amount of autonomy and control over the USU. And more importantly, they have a huge amount of time. The USU meets once every month. There is a huge amount of time and a huge amount of power they can direct towards initiatives. And saying that the USU is sort of mildly slow or bureaucratic, I think is a defense mechanism used to stop things from getting done, from being done. The left should, in a lot of ways, realize the scope of the USU and try and use it to make people's lives better rather than leave it and let it be taken over by people who don't share those views. I think politics, the USU is a student union. Student lives and student incentives have always been political. I think we shouldn't, disguise the fact that they're not. I think the USU should be a political union because students' lives are in so many ways defined by political struggles and the way in which politics affects them. To cite an example, last year the encampment was disrupted by the USU and by Welcome Fest without the broader consultation of board directors. The USU has the power and does encroach on the politics of students all the time. And I think it is a failing to say that it doesn't and it shouldn't, because it will. It inevitably will. And we should be proactive in terms of being forthright about it as a political union and as a political institution. And we should put our politics out in the open rather than sort of cover them under the rug. Question. I think in a lot of ways, yes. We should provide them with wages. Obviously, I think there are questions about cost. I don't think these are nearly as pressing questions as people have made them out to be. The USU this year made around $2 million in profit. Previous year it made $1.5 million in profit. We have the ability to pay people, and these are people that are serving students consistently. They make students' lives better. They ensure that students have a better time on campus. And in a lot of instances, they're people who are dealing with the cost of living crisis in a very real way. And yes, I think we should give them more protections. I think we should give them wages. Yeah. Yes. So I think there are a number of ways in which the USU can fund its initiatives. The first of which, as I identified earlier, is to do with the fact that we are a profitable organization, not a profitable corporation yet, but a profitable organization. And I think that money can be distributed back towards helping these people. Secondly, I think there are a variety of initiatives that we spend money on that don't advance the lives of students. The first of which were a series of funding we give towards the colleges, for example, for Palladian, which are incredibly wealthy institutions that don't need the excess capital. And that I think if we are given the choice, at least if I'm given the choice between funding a series of volunteers who in most instances are people who are giving up their time for basically no real reward, who are going through pretty grueling conditions otherwise, or people who are living in some of the best conditions in any campus in Australia and have huge wealth themselves, I don't know, I feel like it's a very easy decision for me. Yeah, do you have further questions?
In terms of the financial structure of those wages, would you use a minimum wage, or would you have a stipend, or would you have some other idea of what rates you would pay them at?
I think it would depend on the type of volunteer and what they're doing. I think both of those options could be useful. Again, as part of my policies on financials and accountability, I think a lot of the USU's financial system is very opaque. I think I would want to look through a huge amount of that financial data before making a set position. That's a very good question. I think, weirdly enough, I would say the strides they've taken towards incorporation have been quite valiant in some aspects. I think they have paved the groundwork for what I think would be a much better form of incorporation to come, hopefully. I think there are some aspects of this that I don't support. For example, there was a huge amount of spending on legal consultants and other consultants. That money, I think, would be great towards providing volunteers with a little wage or a stipend, and would tangibly help people much more than those cushy consultants, I'm sure, who are paid very nicely, I imagine. However, I do think incorporation is, in terms of the history of the USU, a relatively monumental thing to try and do. And so I definitely applaud the strides made by the 2024 exec. I don't think they have been nearly as consultative with students as they should have been, but at least in my opinion, it's a very, very large project and a very, very momentous project, but one that has been done mildly ineptly. I eat at Manning a lot. There is a lovely place there are two places that have just opened up. The first is one that provides very spicy chicken. I'm not sure if anyone can tell, but I'm not the best with spicy food. However, there is an Asian place there called Sunrise Kitchen that is fabulous. I really, really enjoy. And just as a tip, if you're ever there, order it to have here, because they'll give you like double the amount of noodles and of chicken. And they're really good. Like, genuinely, I'm a huge fan. Actually, I'm going to go there afterwards. I just remembered. Yeah, they're really good. Yeah. Go there for sure. That's another very good question. What do you classify as a service?
It can be a service or an outlet.
I think my stance would be Food Hub, at least as a concept of where it can go and what it should be. I think providing people with food and services and amenities, I think, is maybe one of the most important things the USU can do, and is a form of redistribution that I really applaud. Obviously, I think to the extent that it is right now, it's still very important, but I don't know, I feel like I can see it doing much, much more and being much larger. And as an idea and as a concept, I think it is maybe the most valiant and good thing the USU can do as a service.
How would you make it larger?
Great question. So as I detail a little bit in my policies, the first thing is with existing Food Hub measures expanding their current hours, so allowing people to get products at more times. Obviously, students have weird, funky hours, and I think it's slightly odd to expect that students conform. I think the very last thing I'll note in terms of hours is that in a lot of ways, when you need things most is like really dire times, right? It's like, a public holiday or a late night, when it's better that Food Hubs open and open more. The second thing in terms of expanding existing Food Hub is to add and stock more products and services. So as detailed in my policies, I think Food Hub should stock essential healthcare products. They are as essential as food otherwise might be. We should provide them to people. We should provide them for free. It will make things, I think, much better for most of the campus. And then lastly, I think there is definitely scope to put Food Hub in more places so that more people are there and that more people can get access to it. Yeah.
How do you envision this practically turning out in terms of scope? So is this a gradual plan? Is this, which of the steps comes first? Are we expanding opening hours? Are we opening a new location? What is, like, I guess, more detail?
Yep. So I think adding more Food Hub outlets definitely comes at the end. I would start pragmatically with what we can do to existing outlets. The reason I think that is the most necessary is because board terms are short, and because I think overcommitting to a very large promise is far less useful than committing to something we can tangibly do right now. So jumping into ensuring that Food Hub is existing Food Hub that sort of is already there, the stakes are in the ground, and having it open for longer hours is a change that we can do almost immediately if implemented. And the same is, I think, almost certainly true for providing more products, whereby we have some amount of negotiation with a supplier to do, but other than that, like, I think a person who's willing to sell or donate a huge amount of products, I think you would very easily be, able to find someone who, would like to sell the USU or a very large corporation a huge amount of a product. I think that's pretty easy. So these are two things that I think can be rolled out almost immediately, and I definitely do first. I think expanding the scope of Food Hub and expanding its locations would take longer. It would be difficult, but I think it is something that is tangibly possible and maybe requires the devotion of maybe one or two board terms, but I think is definitely something that's doable. And if we start the foundations now, towards the end of the year, or once those two changes are enacted, is something that I think the USU will feel a bit of path dependency to go through on and put in. That's another very good question. I think the largest limitation to the USU for me, and I know we've sort of talked about it a little bit earlier, is its involvement with clubs and societies. I think the reason I want to flag this is that in a lot of ways, most people don't engage in the USU at large. I think the way in which we engage with it in clubs and societies is particularly important, and we should deal with that, at least in the most extreme circumstances. Secondly, maybe this, I didn't know if I should say this because maybe it's where we're going. I think the USU has a real ability to deal with prices for students on the everyday sense. Is this where we're going? Yeah. This is, I think, the way that most people on the margins engage with what the USU does. So they go to Courtyard and they grab a coffee, or they go to Manning and they grab some sushi from that one place downstairs that always has like a huge line. And so their engagement with the USU, whether they know it or not, is the pinch they feel at their pocket every time they go to a USU outlet. And that affects people basically every day, I would say, for a huge amount of people, or at least for me. Maybe I go to USU outlets too much. But obviously, there are a few things I've put in my policies to deal with that. Yes, so I guess I'll deal with each of those. The first is that this policy doesn't apply to everything, or like every meal that every USU outlet provides, but that it should have minimum options that are available for $10 that people can purchase. So for example, if you go to Courtyard to buy a pizza, it's not like you can, just buy the large every time and it's now $10, but that they have to offer, for example, the pasta of the day for about $10. In terms of the second question, which is where does the money come from? Where does the number come from? Oh, where does the number come from? I think. But also, I guess. Yeah. In terms of where the number comes from, I think $10 is just a nice amount that any student might have lying around in their pocket, that you've got a $10 note, or that most people are paid, by degrees of this. It's just easy. It's something that people will remember. I think just as a number, obviously any number you pick will be mildly subjective. We're not going to do like a full evaluation of, what specific number works best in what specific circumstances based on a series of models. I think it's just a nice number that people might have on them and that they'll remember and that works for them. Lastly, in terms of where the money comes from, there are a few things I'll flag here. The first is that this policy is one that, the first thing is that the USU has a huge amount of money that it can give away, that it does make in profit. And the thing is, this money in some way or form goes towards being redistributed to students. The problem is, a lot of the people who spend money on campus and who feel that pain the most, people with the least amount of money and who get the least redistribution from the USU, right? Like they're not in the colleges, they're not someone who's in like 12 different societies and so they feel the money trickle back to them. It is easier if you just give these people the money that the USU might otherwise try and give them in the most direct sense by just maybe slightly eating into profit. But again, I would flag, I don't think that it is true in all instances that the USU would now be like enormously eating away at money. I think what they would lose in terms of people, in terms of the margin they're able to make on these products, I think they're very easily able to make back by just increasing the product of, for example, the large pizza, and then just using that as a pretty easy cross-subsidy for the smaller one. So yeah, I think it is one that we can afford, one that is paid back for by students with other products that are expensive and that people who are more likely to have a lot of money buy. And lastly, it's one that we can definitely afford because we have a profit, and that money is going to be given back to students in some way. I think it's more fair if we just give it to the students who wouldn't have been able to afford food otherwise. I think there are two ways this can happen. The first is that people on the lowest end get paid more. The second is that the USU gets a lot of its money back from people who are overpaid too much at the highest end. I think both of those are good. In terms of how this will happen, and I'll flag as well, people who are on the board get paid. I'm very happy to take a pay cut if it means the people at the bottom get paid far more than they would have otherwise. In terms of what this ratio practically and pragmatically might look like, I think it will obviously depend based on the exact numbers and figures that the USU sort of keeps to itself. I would very much like to take a whole lot of time to comb through exactly who gets paid too little and exactly who gets paid a huge amount, and work out why that discrepancy exists and more importantly, when it has started to exist. I think in a lot of, at least in a lot of other comparable industries, it has not, we've seen similar trends of there being in previous years a lot of pay parity where executives' salaries will grow pretty much proportionate to people at the bottom, but that doesn't exist anymore today. And understanding why that change has happened, I think will be useful in terms of ensuring that we not only have a good ratio to go back to, but that we've got, we can understand where we went wrong and how not to do that in the future. That's another good question. I think there are a few things here. The first of which is that the board has a lot of control over series of policies I'm sure that management would want to pass. The second is just in general advocacy from the board. I think the board has a lot of power socially and has access to a huge amount of students and students with a huge amount of social and online reach. I think if the board put out this policy, as we talked about, I think most people would find it very, very palatable. And I think that would put a lot of pressure on management to engage in this. The very last thing I'll note is that in a lot of ways, to improve the ratio of pay, you don't have to necessarily hurt management at the top. You just have to help people at the bottom. And I think that is something that they can do that doesn't hurt them, that I think shouldn't hurt them, to help people who are really doing it tough. In my capacity on the USU, I think it would be around the USU Enterprise Bargaining Agreement. However, I think it is very much within the scope of the policies I've talked about to expand this at large towards bargaining with the university in whatever capacity we have on the board. I would be in support of holding any management to account if they try and get in the way of people bargaining for higher wages. I think it is something the board should stand for. Helping its employees and helping the people who are trying to negotiate.
Would you fire the CEO as the board has the power to do?
I think that's a pretty stark question. I would imagine, I would hope it doesn't come to that, is my answer. Firstly, I think I would disagree with the premise that people were sort of reached out to but chose not to engage with things like incorporation. I think the outreach, at least to the extent that it reached me, was made in such a way that I think in a lot of ways deliberately turned people away. Like the questionnaires and the forms that were provided were based around, firstly, incorporation provides all these benefits. Do you support these benefits rather than do you support incorporation? And I think part of reaching out and getting people to engage in reach out processes is making them honest and listening to what people have to say. In terms of how to ensure that people at large are aware of policies and are aware of what's going on, I would note the extent to which the USU, for example, in its variety of social media, rarely posted about incorporation until the few days before the vote, where there were a barrage of Instagram stories that were not educational, but I would say were partisan, right? They were just like, here is why incorporation is good, here are a series of critiques that it's had, and here is putting all of those critiques to bed. Cost of living, I think, is the most important for students. There's a reason that people are all campaigning on it, although I think to varying extents of litigiousness in terms of thinking about their policies and actively thinking about how they might be able to implement them. I hope that the ones that we've curated are ones that seem more detailed because we have thought about them pretty extensively and have tried to implement them or written them in such a way that they can be implemented and can be done. I think it's no accident that the cost of living is a very big issue. I think it's not a secret. Yeah, that's a concise answer. Firstly, I think this is a remarkably successful policy that the USU, or a policy that speaks to a very important issue that the USU should devote its time and energy to. So yes, I understand that this is done with the SRC. As I think we detailed, we're very happy to work in conjunction with what the SRC is doing and to use the USU's reach and its power in order to get at that. The people who are students and renting are people who are in a lot of ways very precarious in terms of their circumstances, that don't have a lot of traditional avenues towards support, and that, for the fact that they are renting, don't have a lot of money to try and find someone who can negotiate these things for them. What they do have are far too often landlords who are trying to abuse them, trying to scalp them for more money, and trying to get away with not providing them with good services or with equitable conditions. For these people, the USU has the power and the ability to expand the current scope of the SRC in providing services for renters, allowing people to get on the rental market, stay there in a way that protects them and gives them a series of protections they wouldn't have otherwise. I would say my policies around accountability, because I think these are policies that affect every other part of policy, right? So almost every other thing that every candidate is going to propose are contingent on people holding them to account as to whether or not they follow through, and holding the USU to account as to whether or not it actively puts its money where its mouth is or where its board directors' mouths are. So in terms of ensuring that we have accountability, the first thing is getting rid of things like in-camera meetings, establishing far more reporting. I am a finance student, regrettably, and as such, I have got education as to how to look through financial statements. The USU's financial documents are not only incredibly opaque, they are at the bottom of a sub-page of a website that I think most people will never see, will never access, they're never published, and that is an intentional decision. It is an intentional decision because providing more accountability on how we spend our money and where we spend our money puts a lot of pressure on people to justify those decisions. And that's why I think it is an ambitious policy, because it's one that affects and touches every other policy that every other candidate is standing for, which is why I'm very sort of determined to get it through, determined to ensure that it sticks and stays on board, and that it becomes the new norm, that reporting is something that is sent out to Pulp and Oni, that we have far more active disclosure with where we're spending our money, and that we have more disclosure on what board directors are doing. And the thing I'll attach to that is around directors declaring their conflicts or biases around things and initiatives they're working on. I think it is regrettable, for example, that the president of the union last year, who is relatively close in proximity, both in the actual event, was close in proximity to the tearing up of the Red Zone report, but was also close in proximity to the organization that was affiliated, or at least socially affiliated, with the tearing up of the Red Zone report. And that person was able to participate in meetings that were investigating why that event happened. That should not occur and would not occur in a USU that I'm a part of.
How would you enforce making the government structure more transparent?
So I think that it's a simple thing to be done once done, in that it is about changing where we put our documents and proactively sending them out towards reporting organizations. But more than that, it is around specificity on reporting. So a lot of the current USU spending will just tell you the general area that we give the money to, but doesn't give you really any information as to what that money in particular goes to and how it is distributed. I, for example, was very keen on finding out more information about the ways in which staff at the USU are paid, and there is not an easy way for a student to do that. Obviously, it can be done, but it can be done via, like being incredibly forceful, I think is the way I would describe it. The USU has to provide annual reports every year and has to provide the minutes of its meetings monthly. What I would do is ensure that when those annual reports are published, they're published in enormous depth and detail as to where we're putting our money, and that becomes the norm moving forward rather than an aberration. It's a good question, and it is an ambitious policy. I think the way in which I envision this policy is is working towards having targets of reducing the number of police and the number of dogs on campus. I think starting with absolutely getting rid of everyone is hard and ambitious, but the more the USU and the uni is able to see evidence that when you don't have cops on campus, and I think this is my opinion, you don't get a huge degree of change. It's not like more students feel threatened. The more they will be willing to see that as evidence and proof that they are able to decrease the number of cops and the number of sniffer dogs. So starting these initiatives from the ground and moving them through slowly and using progress as evidence, I think is the core strategy. In terms of pill testing and pill testing events, this again is a policy that the uni, I think in a lot of ways, would benefit from. Like there are so many very public scandals that the university sort of has to cop about people who are sexually assaulted because they are drugged or they take a drug that leads to them being immensely or incredibly sick. And it is something that we can tell the university, or at least we should be telling the university, is in their interest to ensure that students are safe. They make all of us take a variety of student safety and student well-being and student consent modules. If I'm on board, I would be very eager to take and use their own rhetoric and just say this applies to people's safety when they're going to events. This applies to people's safety when they are, when they're engaging in pill testing, and we should be consistent in our morals. If the university wants to say that they are for things like the consent module, for student well-being, and for people who are disaffected on campus, they should be willing to continue that when it comes towards these events. In terms of my involvement with student politics, I think I have student activism. Sorry, I think I have been sort of proliferally involved, as most students have, I think, with student activism, which is seeing and supporting broad things when they take place, going to big events, like Incorporation, like the Vigil last year, or towards the start of this year. And ensuring that that you speak up, that you post online, that you speak to your friends about it. I think hopefully this is a good middle ground of people that I think there are some people who get very invested in politics and have that as a big part of their lives. That is, I think, incredibly valiant. But for a lot of those people, for a lot of mainstream students, they find it justifiably to be taxing on their mental health to try and consider that, as I think a lot of people who are very invested in politics also find that it's difficult to attend so many protests and see such little done. And that is a sad reality, but it's a reality of politics on campus. I think I've been involved as much as your like average lefty progressive student in terms of doing what I can where I can. In terms of your second question, which was, I believe, how can the USU deal with this?
It was why, as a progressive.
Oh, am I not lying with this faction? I like and support the faction of grassroots for the SRC. They aren't involved in running USU political campaigns anymore, which is a decision I respect, although I respectfully disagree with. So I'm running as an independent candidate for that reason. Yes, I had a few friends who were there, and I would say I did a very valiant job of buying several very overpriced croissants, actually, and providing it to them. I attended a few protests, one protest walking through past Town Hall, which was always sort of fun when I did it, and yeah. Yeah, I think they are not useful and not good. I think there is discussion to be had about the ways in which the university treats international students, how it can provide better, for example, language programs for international students, such that people aren't taking courses that they don't have any experience, for, which is, I think, better for them. However, I think the program policies adopted by the government have been largely a bit of a scapegoat for other problems like housing that haven't done as much to actively deal with those real problems and the core of what they're trying to solve. The first thing I'll note is that the encampment last year was obviously had lofty goals, but I would say it was remarkably successful in terms of swaying what the USU could do, at least from the point it started at. And I think that work needs to continue. So I think it is quite sad and damning that there are, for example, genocides going on around the world that our uni is pretty actively complicit in, and saying that the USU is not or should not be an activist organization, I think, is just slightly incomprehensible. I think any organization which has a degree of power can become an activist organization and is, by virtue of holding power, a political organization. So I would support the USU working with the SRC in terms of organizing protests, in terms of using USU spaces, and also in terms of not actively preventing what the SRC is doing, as they did with Welcome Fest. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, I think this is a worthy question, given that this has been a fight that many people have been trying to engage in and hasn't seen much success. In terms of the way in which this would be followed through, I think the first thing is to try and support and promote existing measures towards explaining just how instrumental international students are towards our uni. Like, we have the privilege of seeing a bunch of very lovely buildings, the vast and working in them and studying in them, the vast majority of which are paid for by international students with much higher fees, and in a lot of instances, international students who are doing it tough because of those higher fees. I think the USU should adopt a vocal stance that concession cards are instrumental and that we should use them, and I think it should use its leverage with the university to try and get the university to push for that more than they are doing currently. Obviously, this is a problem with a high bar for a solution, right? Like, we haven't been able to see progress on it despite 20 years. However, I don't think that is cause for giving up. I think it is cause for digging in and ensuring this continues, because there will be, at least in my opinion, a series of, an instance where circumstances align in such a way that the government might have to change at some point in the future, and it's better to be prepared when that moment comes, and it's better to ensure that this is still on the political agenda when that moment comes. So yeah, that's what I do.
Because as a follow-up, the board has already written and made statements, and the University Senate and Vice Chancellor and Chancellor, and one of the Senate fellows is in fact a Labour MP who has expressed interest and support in this. What more do you think could be done, and in particular the role of the USU in pushing that?
At least in my opinion, this is a political problem rather than a logistical problem or a problem of funding. The government has the ability to do this, they have the funds to do this, and it's something they could change very really in a heartbeat, a few weeks, a few months. In terms of dealing with that political problem, I think the best way to do that is to leverage what the USU has as connections, speak to the Labour MPs that are part of the USU's organisational structure, use alumni that are in positions within the government, and try to reach out to them. Obviously, this is a hard problem to solve that I don't think I could. I would love to present a policy that is like, we would do these 3 things and we'd be able to change what the government can do. I don't think that is capable of being done, at least right now. But the more that we continue to do this, the more it will remain politically palatable, such that when the conditions arise, when the government is motivated one way or another, or the right person gets into the right bit of power at the right time, we have given them the rhetoric to use. We've given them the fact that people are behind this, that they can use as a part of their platform. What colour frog? I'd have to say red because I'm slightly ginger. But they're poisonous. But I'd say red.
Cool. You'd be red. red and poisonous.
No, not poisonous.
You can be a non-poisonous.
Non-poisonous, but red. Yeah. English breakfast tea.
God, that's so
Yeah,
No,
I know.
like that. I
I
like
know.
that.
On the first question, my preference deals, my campaign manager, Lyle Thurbin, is doing. If you'd like a comment, she's very chatty and very nice. I'm sure you can speak to her about that. In terms of who I'm looking forward to working with on the board, I think there are a lot of candidates that share a lot of my views. I've had a few very lovely chats to Sally. I've had a few very lovely chats to Nabila early this week. But of course, Annika is a good friend of mine. I think that would be quite fun. So yeah, I would say maybe Annika Wang. I decided to run because I think, as I detailed a bit earlier, I'll go fast. The board has been, in a very bad way, neglected by people who seek to make positive change. Far too often, I think people use the justification of the board being bureaucratic or it being slow or it being similar to a corporate structure to say that we shouldn't control it or it should be left to its own devices. I think the more the board is left to itself, the more it will trend towards being the things the left critiques it of. And it is on the onus of candidates to take initiative and be a part of the board. And I would like to see myself as doing whatever I can to ensure that the board represents students and represents students in a way that is progressive and adapted to our modern day rather than is fickle and conservative. I will make student life safer where no one else does. I will make it more accountable where no one else does. And I will make it cheaper and more livable in a way that no one else does as well.
Awesome. Cool. That's a wrap.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.